Hello, so this is episode 4 of my narrative of the years 1625 to 1701, Stuart Britain. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking through the years 1649 to 1660. So these are the years of the Republic. It's a really, really unstable time, probably the most unstable time in this whole period. There's a great deal of political changes and kind of different experiments in government. The country is very, very, very divided. The army are still kind of causing lots of problems and really kind of exacerbating the political divisions and the problems that are existing in society. So we left off last time with the execution of Charles I in January 1649 outside of the banqueting house. And this is where we're going to take up. So, this is a really kind of shocking moment for the political nation. The monarch is not only the head of state, the head of government, but also the head of the church as well. So, it really does create a kind of power vacuum and a great deal of kind of unease of, what's the country going to be like? How is the government going to work? Alongside the execution of Charles I in 1649, the monarchy as an institution and the House of Lords are abolished. And there's the establishment of what becomes known as the Commonwealth. So, as I said, this is, the whole kind of top tier of government, if you like, is completely removed at this point in 1649. Also in 1649, Cromwell goes to Ireland, and I'm sure that people listening to this are aware of what Cromwell does in Ireland, but kind of slaughters, massacres, not just the military, but also civilians in Ireland, in Drogheda and Wexford, where, as I said, thousands are killed, and Cromwell's name, is kind of like goes down in infamy in Ireland because of these actions. And one way to think about this is you could say this is almost like, I think for Cromwell and for his supporters, it's kind of retaliation or retribution for the supposed Irish uprising and rebellion of 1641, where, if you remember, there were rumours that hundreds of thousands of Protestants had been killed, and there was this great kind of outpouring of kind of like hysteria, really anti-Catholic hysteria in England. And I think this is used to justify these kind of terrible actions in Ireland where, as I said, kind of innocent civilians are killed. So that's 1649. We go on to 1650. And there's a battle at Dunbar where Cromwell defeats the Scots at Dunbar. The Scots have come out in support of the Stuart monarchy and have declared Charles II the monarch on the execution of Charles I. And really, this is the crushing of the Scots in Dunbar in 1650. Is Cromwell kind of asserting the authority of the Commonwealth, of the Republic, on Scotland as well. But that's not the end of the story. In 1651, Charles II is actually crowned in Scotland. However, and then they try and invade England, and there's a battle at Worcester in 1651 where the Royalists, led by Charles II, and the Scots are involved as well again, are defeated at Worcester. And this is a famous incident where Charles II hides in an oak tree, which is why there's so many pubs even today with the name the Royal Oak. Charles II manages to escape and flees to the continent. But that really, there are other royalist uprisings, but that's the real last kind of significant attempt by Charles II to try and take back the crown. Also in 1651, it's still the Rump Parliament, so still continuing from Pride's Purge in December 1648, the Rump Parliament passes the Navigation Act. And the Navigation Act is an example of mercantilist policy, mercantilism. So the government is really stepping in terms of trade, and it's to ensure that goods from the colonies, so particularly we think about kind of North America and the North American colonies, are being traded directly with England before they go to anywhere else. So it's really kind of limiting the colonists' ability to trade with anybody else. So this is kind of mercantilist policy. This this is really aimed at limiting Dutch trade as well. So what happens the next year in 1652 is the outbreak of the First Anglo-Dutch War. I'll get onto that in a second, but just going back to the Navigation Act, what that is as well, it's not just an economic measure, it's also a political measure, because the Rump Parliament obviously is there standing up for the Commonwealth. It's obviously not supporting the Stuart monarchy, whereas a lot of the colonists were supporters of the Stuart monarchy, and the Navigation Act was kind of an assertion of power by the Rump over the colonies to kind of force this on them, like to show them who's boss, basically. So 1652, the First Anglo-Dutch War breaks out. There's 3 Anglo-Dutch wars in the period that we're talking about in these series of kind of narratives. And the First Anglo-Dutch War breaks out in 1652, and this leads to the Rump passing the monthly assessment, or issuing the monthly assessment, which kind of ironically is very similar to ship money, which Charles had issued Charles I had issued during his personal rule. However, you might say that the monthly assessment at least is being used what it was meant to be used for, war, rather than the ship money, which was kind of just used for Charles to kind of raise some money because Parliament wasn't sitting. So the First Anglo-Dutch War ends in 1654. I'll come back to that. 1653, Cromwell's getting frustrated with the Rump. It's not passing the legislation. It's not doing what it needs to do, and he's getting really frustrated with it. And he famously goes in and he says, "You've sat too long. You need to go. In the name of God, go." And that's in 1653. Dissolves the Rump, and the next kind of experiment in government is called the Nominated Assembly, where there's 140 members of the Nominated Assembly, and they are nominated, as the name suggests. And the thing that you need to know about the Nominated Assembly is that it's very divided on religious lines. So the execution of the king leads to a great outbreak of different dissenting groups, radical groups, not just the execution of the king, but the war, the relative freedom of press that's because of the lack of censorship during wartime, the new model army. All of these things lead to these kind of radical groups growing. And the Nominated Assembly is very, very divided between the more conservative members, and there are some members who are fifth monarchists who are much more radical. So it doesn't really get a great deal done. Quite soon after the Nominated Assembly is kind of sitting, Major General John Lambert issues the Instrument of Government. And this is a constitutional document that makes Oliver Cromwell the Lord Protector. We'll come back to that in just a minute. So the Instrument of Government is issued by Major General John Lambert, which gets rid of the Nominated Assembly and makes Cromwell the Lord Protector. This is an example of military involvement in politics. So the military is getting increasingly involved in politics, and Cromwell's reliant on the military, and it kind of under the military. I think the story of these 11 years in the Republic is military kind of undermining the different political settlements. Cromwell relies on the military to kind of crush opposition, as we've seen with the Scots and the Royalists. Also, the Levellers in 1649 had a mutiny in Burford that the military were used to crush. So Cromwell's reliant on the military, as we see with the Instrument of Government. Okay, so on to 1654. So Cromwell's just solved the Rump. The First Anglo-Dutch War ends, and this is a victory for Cromwell against the Dutch, so reasonably successful, but obviously war costs money. It's never really popular. We get the first Protectorate Parliament set up in 1654. So we have the Lord Protector with a Council of State and a single chamber of Parliament, which is 460 members. There's set to be elections every 3 years, and votes go to kind of property owners, people who own more than £200 worth of property. There's freedom of worship. There is a state church, but there's freedom of worship to all but Catholics. And so that's the first Protectorate Parliament. I should also say, previously, actually, we've had the Toleration Act, which was passed by the Rump. So this leads to this kind of explosion of dissent, as I said. So we can see here with the first Protectorate Parliament and the Instrument of Government, it's an attempt at some political stability. It's an attempt by those in power, and as I said, the army, to really set out a new type of government. However, it doesn't last very long. Cromwell's kind of frustrated with the first Protectorate Parliament, and that's dissolved in 1655. There's also in 1655 a very significant event, Penruddock's uprising. So Penruddock was a royalist who led an uprising. It didn't succeed, but Cromwell realises that there needs to be a closer kind of handle on things on the ground in the regions. There needs to be a closer handle on what's going on. He's fearful of more royalist uprisings to kind of undermine his rule. So what happens is a new type of government, a new experiment, is the rule of the major generals. So it's almost like a military takeover. So the rule of the major generals is where the country is split into 11 districts, each ruled by a major general. And this is when there is this kind of reformation of manners. So in certain, they're ruled by different major generals. Some are more strict than others, banning things on Sundays, banning Christmas. All these things happen at this time. Some of those things had happened before with the Rump and other parliaments. So we had the Long Parliament, then we had the Rump, then we have the Nominated Assembly, then the first Protectorate Parliament. Now we're on the rule of the major generals. To make it even more confusing, in 1656, the Second Protectorate Parliament is called. In 1657, we have the end of the rule of major generals. It's incredibly unpopular. And we also have a new experiment in government. So this is, I can tell it's hard to keep up. But you can tell how unstable it is for all these different types of government, all these different experiments. So the next thing we have is the humble petition and advice, which is offered to Cromwell. Again, it's a constitutional document where Cromwell is offered the crown, which he doesn't accept. Because of pressure from the army, and he dwells on it for a while. Should he accept the crown? Should he become king? And he doesn't, but he becomes the Lord Protector for life. And this is where some people say Cromwell's kind of king in all but name, because Lord Protector is it becomes hereditary. There's the Lord Protector, you've got the House of Lords restored, and the Commons. Parliament controls the army, there's set to be regular elections and limited religious freedom. So the humble petition in 1657 is a new attempt at political settlement. So why is Cromwell able to continue throughout all of this? And one way it's been explained to me in the past is that Cromwell had support of the army. He also had been an MP, so he had a kind of role in the army, in the New Model Army, and he'd been an MP, so he could kind of ride these two horses at once. What happens next, we see it's not easy to do that, and other people don't find it as easy. So Cromwell in 1658, Oliver Cromwell dies, and his son, Richard Cromwell, becomes Lord Protector. Unlike his father, Richard Cromwell doesn't have the support of the army. He doesn't have that experience, and he, almost from the word go, lacks kind of legitimacy and lacks support. Richard Cromwell calls the Third Protectorate Parliament in 1659, but as I said, he lacks that kind of legitimacy, lacks support, and the Council of Officers, here we go again, the army stepping in to kind of undermine the political situation. The Council of Officers force him to resign, and they recall the Rump Parliament. So it's going all the way back to the Rump. So when we get to the end, I'll do a quick recap of all the different types of Parliament. And so now we're into 1660, and General Monk, who's a major general, he's been based in Scotland, ruling Scotland, sees this kind of like unraveling of the political situation. Again, the power vacuum. Nobody's kind of really in charge. It's kind of very chaotic. Marches from Scotland and restores the Long Parliament, who, if you remember, were purged back in 1658. The Long Parliament then dissolves itself, and there's a newly elected Parliament called the Convention Parliament, which meets, and they were presented with the Declaration of Breda. So the Declaration of Breda was put together by Charles II and his advisors, and it says, Charles is basically saying it's kind of a manifesto for him to be installed as monarch, to be restored. And it says there's going to be cooperation and harmony. It says there's going to be amnesty for those involved in the interregnum, those who are involved in the Commonwealth, in the Republic. apart from a few who were involved in the execution of his father. There's going to be arrears pay for the army and religious toleration. So basically, Charles is saying, I'm not going to come in and kind of kill lots of people. I'm not going to come in and be autocratic. I'm not going to come in and kind of dissolve Parliament. I'm going to work with Parliament. We're going to have religious toleration. I'm going to try and bring stability and kind of heal and settle. That's the phrase. On the 5th of May, Parliament vote to restore the monarch, the Lords and the Commons, and then on the 25th of May, Charles II lands in Dover, which paves the way for the Restoration. So just to kind of quickly recap, we start from 1649. We've had Pride's Purge in December 1648, so the Long Parliament has been purged, so we have the Rump. Cromwell dissolves the Rump in 1653, and we have the Nominated Assembly. Following the failure of the Nominated Assembly, because it's so divided, we have the first Protectorate Parliament. I'm just looking at my notes here to make sure I'm correct, which is based on the kind of instrument of government, Cromwell being the Lord Protector. Then the first Protectorate Parliament is dissolved. We have Penruddock's uprising, the rule of the Major Generals. We have the second Protectorate Parliament, and then the end of the rule of the Major Generals. Then we have the humble petition and advice, where Cromwell is offered the crown and he doesn't accept it. Then Cromwell dies in 1658. Richard Cromwell becomes Lord Protector. Richard Cromwell calls the third Protectorate Parliament, doesn't have legitimacy. Council of Officers force him to resign and recall the Rump. Monk marches to Scotland and restores the Long Parliament. The Long Parliament dissolves itself. And then we have the Convention Parliament, who agree to the Restoration. And that's where we're going to leave it. It was a long one because it's so complicated. Thank you for listening.